Edge of Eternities is finally here, and that means that there are positively galaxies of new cards out there that you may want to add to your commander decks. But with so many new cards, it's really easy to get lost in the void of space and miss out on absolute bangers, only to discover them in a year's time and wonder why you didn't notice that card the first time around. It's for that reason that I have ranked and reviewed every single card from Edge of Eternities. From the shiniest new commanders to the best cards for the 99, I'm going to share my thoughts on all the commander cards that I think are good enough to warrant your attention. If I don't talk about a card, it's because I don't think it's good enough, but I will still have left notes on every card in this document, which you'll find down below the like button. And why should you listen to my yapping? Well, my cat thinks that I'm one of the best deck builders on the internet, and I'd say one of my biggest strengths is my taste and ability to be able to spot a good card and what it synergizes with. But in reviewing so many cards, I'll almost certainly miss out on an interaction, some synergy, or just overlook a card entirely, and if you think I've done that, share your 2 cents down in the comments so that the rest of the class can learn from your card spotting prowess. Ultimately, my goal is that you'll leave this video excited about cards that you've overlooked, or that you spot new exciting cards that you hadn't noticed yet. I'm not here to tell you why your new favorite card is bad. But with all that said, let's take a look at some new cards from Edge of Eternities. First up is Beyond the Quiet, a 5-mana white sorcery. 5-mana board wipes get a bad rap, but I think this card is very solid. Every second deck these days is abusing graveyards, so the exile ability of this card is great, and I think it fits well into just about any deck that wants a board wipe. I put this in a Planeswalker or vehicle focused deck, and I think it's a solid one-sided wipe that hurts all the more because it exiles. I think it's A tier. Cosmogrand Zenith is a 3-mana white human soldier. It's clearly a great card if you're playing Soldier Tribal, but I think it will also be great in any white-based go-wide deck, provided one can reliably cast 2 spells a turn fairly regularly. Stacking those 1/1 counters will become problematic real quick, and I think Zenith and Skullclamp also make a really fun white card draw engine. It is B tier. Next up is Dual Sun Technique, a 2-mana white instant, and I absolutely love this card. It's a really great addition for any Voltron deck that includes white, like my John Benton deck. It's one of very few instant speed double strike spells available, giving you the ability to surprise opponents, and because Voltron themes often involve some counters, will likely replace itself with its card draw. In that context, I think it's A tier. Emergency Eject is a 3-mana white instant, and it's a solid piece of generalist removal. It's decent in pretty much any deck. Its power matches cards like Stroke of Midnight or Beast Within, and it's worth playing just so you can shout "Get Ejected" at your friend as you kill their thing. It's A tier. Next up is Exalted Sunborn, a 5-mana white angel wizard, and it's an absolute commander banger. 5 mana for a 4/5 flying lifelinker is already pretty good, but then add to that the token doubling effect and the fact that you can warp that card out for only 2 mana, and it's incredibly strong. It will be interesting to see whether the warp effect is impactful in any sort of real way, but regardless, any white tokens based deck will want this card, and in that context, it's S tier. Focus Fire is a 1-mana white instant, and I really love 1-mana instants. The reason cards like Path of Exile or Lauren's Escape are so good is because of how easy it is to play out your game plan and hold open mana for that interaction. Anyone that's tried to hold open mana for a Beast Within or Stroke of Midnight knows how it can absolutely wreck your curve or game plan unless that curve was already in the bin and you had nothing to cast. With that in mind, in any creature-based deck, this will often be able to deal with 5+ toughness creatures for simply 1 mana, which is pretty great. It's A tier. Leah Guided by Light is a 3-mana white human soldier. As a commander, I think she's pretty mid, unless you've got plans for some combo shenanigans where you infinitely loop an artifact spell. I'd personally rather run the Gaffer as a commander because his card draw ability triggers every turn and not only on your turn. As a card in the 99, I think she's a little bit better, and I can see her being a great addition in many life gain based decks. I think many will want to pair her with Ragost, and I can see her working really well with a commander like Hope S-Time. I think her warp ability though is very low value, and I think overall she's probably B tier in both a commander and 99 category. Hardlight Containment is a 1-mana white enchantment, and you know how I feel about 1-mana removal. I absolutely love this card in any deck that's running enough artifacts to support it, with the only downside being that it's sorcery speed. For that reason, it's B tier. Next up is another good 1-mana white spell in Honor. This sorcery is good in any Voltron deck that relies on counters, like John Benton or Lise. Whilst in Lisa's case it doesn't benefit from her cost reduction, as a 1-mana spell that's a cantrip and gives +1/+1, it's a solid card for her. If you like Voltron commanders and you haven't watched my Lise video, go and watch it right after this. Honor is B tier. Lumen class frigate is a 2-mana white spacecraft. It's a decent anthem effect for any go-wide decks for a fairly cheap mana cost. Its station cost to make it a creature is pretty steep though, so I don't see that being relevant in all but the games where things aren't going too well for you. It's B tier. Lux Knight Breacher is a 4-mana white creature, and it's one of those cards that seems like it could be a pauper or budget banger, and that's one of my favorite types of cards. In many decks where you have lots of creatures or artifacts, this could easily be a 10/10 or much larger very easily. It's B tier. Patrolling Peacemaker is a 3-mana white artifact creature. It's very one-dimensional, but is very good at what it does, and it's an auto-include in almost any white deck that cares about 1/1 counters. If not dealt with, I can see this easily proliferating once a turn cycle at the very least. I think it's A tier. Next up is Pinnacle Starcage. It's a 3-mana white artifact, and when it enters, it exiles all creatures and artifacts with mana cost 2 or less till it leaves the battlefield. This is more of a competitive card, but it's not a bad way to punish mana rock abusers or creature token based strategies. It's B tier. Reroute Systems is a 1-mana white instant that can either give protection or be removal. I wish this gave hexproof instead of indestructible, but other than that, it's a decent protection spell at 1 mana, and I absolutely love modal spells. I wouldn't overlook the removal side of this card as it can deal with some meaningful threats, like an Orcish Bowmasters or a Bloom Tender. I think it's B tier. Next up is the Sarima. It's a 3-mana legendary spacecraft, and as a commander, I think it's okay. Having a legendary creature tutor in the command zone could be rather useful if you have a toolbox sort of deck with lots of creatures that do useful things, like drawing cards, destroying things, or exiling graveyards. Alternatively, it could be great if there's a combo angle and the Sarima helps you tutor for a combo piece. All that said, I think the Sarima is far better in the 99 than it is in the command zone. Having that tutor effect in any commander deck that includes white, paired with the ability to make attacking less painful, makes it an A tier card for the 99 and probably a B tier commander. The last card that we have to look at in white is Zealous Display, a 3-mana white instant. It's quite a cool effect in go-wide offensive decks, and I can see it being especially useful in token decks, where 2 power on every creature for 3 mana is a pretty good deal, especially at instant speed. The fact that it can then be used defensively makes it just that little bit better. I think it's B tier. Now, I've been told that despite the set having just been released, everyone's moved on to Spider-Man and other sets and that no one cares about Edge of Eternities. If you're enjoying this, drop an "I'm still here for EOE" down in the comments and like the video to tell me and the algorithm that you think it's good and so that I know to do this again for the next set. And subscribe while you're down there for more videos that will help you build better decks, play better, and have more fun. You'll be helping me in my quest to reach 100,000 subscribers, and more importantly, you'll make sure that my next banger gets delivered directly into your eyeballs. The first blue card we're going to look at is Cerebral Download, a 5-mana instant. 5 mana for a draw spell is quite a lot, and this is a draw spell that you can only really use in artifact heavy decks, but that said, in the right deck, like my Golbez deck that I'm releasing a video about soon, it can be truly wild. Digging anywhere from 5 to 15 cards into your deck, finding the cards that you want, drawing them, and filling your graveyard in the process is pretty strong. In my Galazeth deck, that could easily be surveilling up to 30 or 40 cards pretty regularly, and in that context, it's pretty damn good, especially at instant speed. For me, this is A tier. Next up is Consult the Star Charts, a 2-mana instant. I think this is a pretty decent draw spell for Commander. It digs through our library and scales based on how many lands we have. So in the mid game, this could easily dig 5 cards into your library for only 2 mana. If we kick it at 4 mana, it's got a lower floor than something like Stock Up, but a much higher ceiling, especially in something like a Simic deck where we have tons of land. I think this card is A tier. Cryogen Relic is a 2-mana artifact, and it's like a blue Ichor Wellspring or Mephitic Draft style card, one that can also stun a creature. In many Artifacts Matters decks or a deck that wants this style of card, this will be a basic but good addition, and I think in that context it's A tier. And we are back on removal. Cryo Shatter is a 1-mana enchantment, and a rather good piece of blue removal. -5 power for 1 mana is already pretty good, but destroying the creature when it becomes tapped, either to use an ability or to attack, is a banger. It does have limitations though, because it's not instant speed and it doesn't destroy an already tapped creature, but in the right deck I still think it's pretty good, and I think it's B tier. Insight Engine is a 3-mana artifact, and any card that allows us to repeatedly draw cards is going to be pretty strong. In this case, the card is decent if we have no way to get additional charge counters on it or untap it. But if you do, this goes from good to absolutely broken. And I think this card is A tier. Men on the Right Hand is a 5-mana blue legendary creature. I may live to regret this take, but I think Menon is just okay. Not great, but not terrible. As a commander, I think it pales in comparison to something like Urza, but it could still be cool. There are multiple angles one can take, but they all involve generating as much value as possible by playing artifacts off the top of your library, and then using those to play yet more artifacts using the mana ability on the commander. As a card in the 99, I think this artifact future sight is about as good as it is in the command zone, because to make good use of the ability, your deck really has to be built around it. Something like my upcoming goal-based list is a good example. In both cases, I think he is B tier. Next up is Quantum Riddler, a 5-mana creature. The Riddler seems like a decent card that can enable all sorts of wacky shenanigans when you have no cards in hand, like making your wheels draw an extra card. So there are some decks that will really want this card, but I think they're going to be very limited, and I see this card actually ending up being quite weak and unimpactful in all but the most min-max scenarios like CDH or something like Legacy in 60-card formats. I think he is B tier. Scour for Scrap is a 4-mana instant, and I had to reread this card twice to make sure I didn't miss something. We get to tutor for any artifact, and we get to recur an artifact from our graveyard. I feel like I say this a lot these days, but on an uncommon, the power creep is real. To me, this seems like it wants to go in almost any artifact-heavy deck, especially ones that are using draw spells like Windfall or Thirst for Knowledge. I think this card is going to stick around and get played quite a lot, and I think it's S tier. Starfield Vocalist is a 4-mana creature that is basically a Panharmonicon, but better for any blue deck. Copying Enter's abilities has been known to be good and even game-breaking, and this ability is incredibly versatile. It's a good card for 4 mana, and the fact that it can be warped in for 2 mana is absolutely wild for any combo shenanigans. I think this card is S tier. Starwinder is a 7-mana creature, but don't get caught up on that mana cost, pay attention to his absolutely ludicrous ability. The ability to turn your wide board of Merfolk tokens or whatever else you have into drawing 10 or maybe even far more cards for 4 mana is kind of wild, and I think the warp ability is where the real power of this card lies. Obviously, you can also cheat him into play, or if you're playing Simic, you can just hardcast him on turn 4 because Simic. But yeah, in a creature heavy deck or Leviathan Tribal, especially at lower power levels like bracket level 2, I think this card is really good. I think he's A tier. Uthros Psionicist is a 3-mana creature, and is a card that very specific decks will definitely want, like an Alisaie Alphino deck. In general, it's not that great, but in those certain decks, it will shine enough to be B tier. Uthros Researchcraft is a 3-mana spacecraft, and despite paying very close attention to the set launch, I surprisingly hadn't seen this card at all until I made this video, which kind of backs up why I'm making this video to begin with. Drawing a card every time you play an artifact is pretty broken in any artifact-heavy deck, and 3 mana for that ability is pretty damn cheap. The fact that it passively ticks up charge counters is also fantastic, because I could see this being played in many decks that don't run a lot of creatures for stationing. I don't think the attack power is why you run this card, but it becoming a game-ending threat certainly isn't bad. For almost any blue-based artifact deck, I think this card is S tier. The last blue card we're going to look at is Weft Walking, a 6-mana enchantment. I think this card is okay. If your deck wants wheel abilities, it probably wants all of them it can get, but 6 mana for this ability is a lot. Then I don't love that the second ability works for your opponents too, though if your deck is filled with tons of high mana cost spells, you typically would come out on top. I think where this card will probably really shine is in a group hug build like Miss Bumbleflower, but I think the card overall is B tier. The first black card we're going to look at is Elfuriel Stonechosen, a 5-mana legendary creature. While the ward ability definitely needs to hire a new PR team, I like interesting and specific ward costs, especially if it's on a commander. And that's important because anytime lose half your life is strapped to a creature, that card is instantly seen as the biggest threat in the world. In practice, I find this ability often underperforms quite significantly despite making you seem very scary, so just be aware of that if you choose to run this. As a commander, I think he'll be very one-dimensional and will probably end up being quite boring after the novelty wears off. As a card in the 99, I think he'll be far more fun, but if you're playing him, I think you'll want to give him haste and evasion. He is probably a B tier for both. Modal spells get my little froggy heart pumping, and this one is no different. Archenemy's Charm is a 3-mana instant, and you're pretty much forced to run this in a mono black deck or maybe a 2-color deck. But if you do run it, 3 mana for exiling a creature at instant speed certainly isn't bad. The fact that you can either use it to recur stuff or use this in a Voltron setting to boost your commander, like in my Skullbriar deck where lifelink is highly sought after, makes this card pretty good. I think many people struggle to fit the vegetables like removal or ramp into their commander decks, and in this case, I can add this to my deck with the intention of boosting my commander, but if I need to use it as a removal spell, I always have that option. I think this is A tier. Chorale of the Void is a 4-mana enchantment. This card has a pretty limited application, but where it does work, it'll be kind of good. And that will be in any deck that mills or controls, where many creatures are ending up in your opponent's graveyards, like a Captain and Gathrod deck. In those decks, I think this will be a fun card, but it is ultimately B tier. Dubious Delicacy is a 3-mana artifact, and is interesting in any decks that use permanents and especially artifacts as sacrifice fodder. Those decks often have limited synergistic removal options, and -3/-3 at instant speed certainly isn't terrible there. Think decks like Barbala Saga. In that context, this is B tier. Elegy Acolyte is a 4-mana creature. I pulled one of these in the pre-release and I really liked it. It's a 4/4 lifelink for 4 mana, and that's already pretty decent, but add to that the ability to draw up to 3 cards per combat, and then making attackers to trigger that on top of that, and it's a really solid card. It's even better because it's a cleric, and I think that this is a top tier addition to any cleric typal deck. I think it's A tier. Entropic Battle Cruiser is a 4-mana artifact, but I feel like this is more of a standard card. That said, in discard heavy decks, like a Tiny Bones deck, this card is definitely worth your consideration, but ultimately it's B tier. Next up is Fall is Faithful, a 3-mana creature, and this was one of my preview cards. To mirror what I said there, I love cards that turn a downside into an upside, and this card is fantastic in any deck where you want to kill your own stuff that has death triggers, like my Merrin deck. In that environment, this card is a solid B. Hilderblade is a 1-mana artifact. It's a simple card, but 1 mana for 3 power that equips hopefully for free is kind of wild in any aggressive deck, like a Voltron deck that includes black. Rancor is obviously a better card, but there's a comparison here to be made in a color that doesn't usually get that kind of thing. If your deck wants this, you'll already know, but it's B tier. Hymn of the Faller is a 2-mana sorcery. If you're running a deck that has permanents regularly going to the graveyard, then 2 mana for Surveil 1 Draw 2 is a pretty good deal. It's B tier. Lightless Evangel is a 2/2 for 2 mana. I could see this card quietly becoming a 5/5 or even a 10/10 or bigger if left unchecked in the right kind of deck, like a cleric deck or a deck churning through disposable artifacts, perhaps treasures in something like a Burrokas deck. I think this card is B tier. Requiem Monolith is a 3-mana artifact, and I really wish this card didn't have the sorcery speed clause at the end. Either way, I think it's still a good card. It'll make your creatures far less likely to be blocked, but more importantly, if you're running a deck that synergistically damages its own creatures or runs damage-based board wipes like Earthquake or Spiteful Banditry, that board wipe or damage will likely also draw you a ton of cards. This card is B tier. Sothera the Super Void is 2025 card design power creep back at it again. What if we made Grave Pact but with a less restrictive mana cost? And what if rather than helping people fill their graveyards, those creatures were exiled instead? And if a player has no creatures, we get to steal the best thing we've exiled and make it bigger. I will admit that this card being unable to perform a Grave Pact lock, allowing no one to have any creatures, is a much healthier version of the card, but still play this card with care. All that said, in any Aristocrats and Graveyard Recursion style deck, this card is going to be very strong. If it was less unfun to play against, I'd probably give it S tier, but I would say it's A tier. Caesarian Voidborn is a slightly more expensive but broader Blood Artist, as it triggers off of artifacts and not only creatures. In any Aristocrats deck or deck that wants artifacts in the graveyard, this card will do well. Not to mention slotting very well into an Edgar Markov deck as it's a vampire. I reckon it's B tier. Timeline Color is a 2/2 with haste for 2 mana. I think this is intended as a competitive aggressive card and not really for commander. That said, like Gravecrawler, it can also be a combo piece. Provided you have a way to gain life and a sack engine, you'll be able to do the same Blood Artist or Zulaport Cutthroat shenanigans with this card. I think it's B tier. Tragic Trajectory is a 1-mana sorcery, and it's a great removal card for decks like my Barbala Saga deck where permanents leave the battlefield every turn. -10/-10 is nice because it also gets around indestructible, so it could even deal with an Eldrazi, and can mess with combat even if it's cast as a 2/2. The only real downside is that it's a sorcery. I think it's B tier. Umbral Collar Zealot is a 3/2 for 2 mana, and I think it's probably going to be one of the cards you see the most across the table from the set. Sack outlets are always pretty good, and being able to surveil off that is absolutely wild for many reasons. If your deck wants sacrifice outlets, either for combos or incremental value, they are going to want this one. I think this card is S tier. Shu Ifrit Osteoharmonist is a 3-mana creature. As a commander, we obviously want to yeet big creatures into our graveyard and then make shambling abilityless copies of them. This may be a hot take, but I think that's going to be fairly underpowered in Commander, because in most games, I see this coming out on turn 3, then you making a skeleton on turn 4, and it can't attack until turn 5, which I think is actually pretty bad. Instead, where I think this card shines is in the 99 of a graveyard-based deck, where it's a great value engine, being able to bring back creatures that you can sacrifice and repeat every turn. It'll also help you fill your board with small blockers so that you don't take combat damage. I think this card is C tier as a commander, but B tier in the 99. 0 Point Ballad is a great removal spell. I love a one-sided board wipe, and this could easily be that, as the card gives you flexibility in what you destroy, especially if your stuff is bigger than your opponent's. Plus, if you spend enough mana, you get to reanimate and steal something that died. I think this card is B tier. Moving on to red, we start with Cut Propulsion, a 3-mana instant. Single target removal in red, especially in mono red, is quite hard to come by, and for that purpose alone, I'm highlighting this as an option. I think the card is B tier. Depthshaker Titan is a 7-mana artifact creature, and it allows you to turn a pile of junk into a win condition. It fills a similar role to cards like Rise and Shine that would be great in any deck that has an abundance of artifacts, like my Galazeth Prismari deck, where I regularly have over 30 artifact tokens. I think this card is B tier. Devastating Onslaught is a sorcery that you can sink a whole bunch of mana into. Anytime you can make multiple copies of a single card, there's room for a lot of hijinks or game-breaking things, like making a bunch of Ancient Copper Dragons, or perhaps a bunch of Eldrazi. You get the idea. I think this is B tier. Evendo Brushrazor is a 2/2 for 3 mana. I found him when I was making my Ragost video, and if you're a deck that sacrifices lots of non-token permanents, he's an absolute powerhouse, giving you the ability to gain a lot of impulse draw. Commanders like Henzi, Korvold, and Ziatora don't need more juice, but in this card they certainly got it, and I think he is A tier. Full Bore is a 1-mana instant, and as far as cheap red pump spells go, I think this is pretty good. It's the kind of card I was looking for when I was brewing my Vincent deck for Matt Mercer, and it's basically Infuriate but better if you're warping. I think this card is B tier. Long Range Sensor is a 3-mana artifact, and in a go-wide deck, especially one that's attacking with lots of tokens, like Krenko or Renanseri, this card can put in some serious work. In a best case, you could discover 3 times over 2 turns, and throw in some extra combat, and the ceiling is even higher. For red card advantage, that's pretty damn good, and I think this card is A tier. Melded Moxide is a 2-mana artifact, and while simple, I love my Thrill of Possibility style effects in red decks, and I like ones that are strapped to permanents even more because I can use them as sacrifice fodder. Again, the card is simple, but if your deck wants it, you'll already know, and I think this card is B tier. Memorial Vault is a 4-mana artifact, and it's an interesting card draw engine that likely warrants a spot in any impulse draw deck that's running many artifacts. A commander like Sammy, who we'll talk about in a bit, could probably make really good use of this card, and I think it's B tier. Pain for All is a 3-mana enchantment, and I think it's a fantastic card. If you've seen my Sauron video, you'll know that I like fling effects, and I love them even more when they don't require me to sacrifice the creature doing the damage. The fact that you can then attack with that creature and make it harder to block because of the bounce damage is even better. The card can also enable a ton of other shenanigans, like enchanting Dawnsire, going to combat, and then dealing 100 damage to itself, which then deals 100 damage to each opponent. A play truly worthy of yelling. I think the card is A tier. Ruinous Rampage is a 3-mana sorcery, and as someone that plays a lot of artifact decks, I don't really want to be highlighting a mini Vandal Blast, but I feel like I have to. If you wanted your opponents to never have any mana rocks, this is certainly one way to do it. I think it's B tier. Tanuk Steadfast Second is a 4-mana creature. I assume you've already seen him, but if not, he answers the question, what if every big scary artifact or creature threat you can think of cost 3 mana and had haste? Ancient Copper Dragon? Well, 3 mana and haste. What about Itali? Yep, also 3 mana and haste. And Ulamog? Yeah, you guessed it, 3 mana and haste. As a commander, I think this deck practically builds itself, and it's bound to be a good time. But you probably want creatures like the Copper Dragon that can generate tons of mana when you warp them in, so that you can spend that mana later to recast them from exile. As a card in the 99, I think it's less good, but could still work really well to make your Gishaths or Terror of the Peaks cost less mana for some shenanigans. I think Tanuk is S tier. Warmaker Gunship is a 3-mana artifact, and I think it's a cool piece of red removal in an artifact-heavy red deck, especially if the deck can flicker it. I think it's B tier. Weapons Manufacturing is a 2-mana enchantment, and it's another card that I found while making my Ragos video. In any deck that's playing and sacrificing a lot of artifacts, it's an amazing engine, and the fact that created munitions tokens can deal damage to faces or remove creatures is really good. It's obviously quite narrow, but if your deck wants this, you'll probably already know about it, and it's an amazing card in that context. I think it's A tier. Weftstalker Ardent is another card that fits into that artifact strategy, and if you have a deck that wants reckless Fireweaver-like abilities because you're playing or creating tons of artifacts, look no further than Weftstalker Ardent. It's B tier. Baloth Prime is a 4-mana creature, and 4 mana for a 10/10 that makes a 4/4 every time you sacrifice a land is pretty damn good. This card goes very hard in a deck that's sacrificing lands, like the World Shaper Precon from the new set. He's seemingly printed to be an upgrade or addition to it, so get on that if you have that deck. He's equally as good any other deck that's sacrificing lands regularly, and I think he's A tier. Next up is Close Encounter, a 2-mana instant. It's a solid damage dealing spell, which is not to be confused with a fight spell because our creatures don't take any damage when using this one. It's going to fit well into any green deck that has large creatures, and I think it's B tier. Next up is Exploration Broodship, a 1-mana spacecraft. It's obviously a nod to exploration, letting you play an extra land each turn, but it's also not as good given the hoops we have to jump through to station it. It is still fairly easy to station, and allows you to play an extra land a turn for only 1 mana. The fact that later in the game this allows you to recast permanents from your graveyard is pretty wild, and that's a lot of commander value. In any deck that cares about getting many lands into play, especially a landfall deck, I think this is S tier. Famished Worldsire is an 8-mana creature and is truly worthy of that mythic rarity. Yes, it costs 8 mana, but in the color green, you can surely play that like turn 5 on average. He has Ward 3, because of course he does, and he'll devour as many lands as you want him to when he enters. Assuming that's around 8, that'll make him at 24/24, and you're going to look at the top 24 cards of your library and put all the lands that you find into play, which in most cases will be about 10. That's one hell of a ramp spell. Now pair this with cards like Will of the Sultai and you're in for a real good time. He obviously fits well into the landfall theme, but I think he works well in any deck including green that's ramping into big scary creatures, like a Simic Leviathan deck. I think you're going to be seeing plenty of this guy at your commander tables because he is S tier. Frenzied Baloth is a 2-mana aggressive creature. I think this is an absolute banger in standard, but only an okay commander card. Really, it's his abilities that are useful in Commander, and making your creatures uncounterable and making combat damage unpreventable is very solid for 2 mana. I think you'll find a home in higher power because allowing you to force through your win conditions because of the prevalence of counter magic and interaction is really strong, but at mid to lower powers I think we will see him show up far more rarely because his abilities, while strong, only impact specific decks and situations. I think he's B tier. Horizon Explorer is a 3-mana creature, and his ability that allows lands to enter untapped is a pretty big deal, and I think that's really the main value of this card. Play him to make your budget mana bases sing or to enable some broken combo shenanigans. He also works in more aggressive landfall decks, and in those situations could be A tier, but in general I think he's probably B tier. Icetool Explorer is a 4-mana creature, and man, what a banger. First we had Head Shredder, and now we've got this. He allows you to play extra lands, lets you play lands from your graveyard, and mills cards when lands come into play. He does pretty much everything you'd want in a card like this, and if you're playing any Graveyard Matters or Lands Matters decks that include green, your eyes are likely gleaming red and your grubby paws are likely already typing his name into your LGS order box. He is S tier. Loading Zone is a 4-mana enchantment, and its effect is likely something you want in pretty much any 1/1 counter deck. 4 mana isn't insignificant, but the doubling can be very explosive. I think the warp ability will likely not be a big deal, but regardless, I think this card is A tier. Melt Strider's Resolve is a 1-mana enchantment and is another of my preview cards. It's great removal for any Voltron decks that include green, like my John Benton or Skullbriar decks, letting your likely larger commander clear the way and then get much harder to block. I think it's B tier. Mindform Harmonizer is a 4-mana creature that has shenanigans written all over it, because doubling is broken. Stringing together 2 to 3 land drops in a turn shouldn't be difficult with something like a ramp spell and a Terramorphic Expanse. That would make a lowly 3/3 a 24/24. Yep, shenanigans. I think this card is A tier. And we have more shenanigans with Ouroboros, a 4-mana creature. Play him, pump him, and go to combat, then make your entire board huge. Obviously there's a few hoops to jump through here, but on the right deck, like a green aggro deck, I think he could be pretty strong. And I think he'd fit well into an elf deck, or any similar deck where you have a wide board of small creatures. I think it's A tier. Terra Symbiosis is a 3-mana enchantment, and is another great example of 2025 card design. When I saw this, my little Skullbriar-addled brain just started to vibrate with excitement, because if I add 3 counters to Skullbriar, I get to draw 3 cards. And now think how that interacts with Ouroboros. Yeah, it's pretty much an auto-include in any 1/1 counters deck that includes green, and I think this card is S tier. Our first multicolored card is Space-Time Anomaly, a 4-mana Azorius sorcery. It's a pretty narrow card, but with recent support for the mill archetype with cards like Hope S-Time, this card has a great home, and in that home it is incredibly good. I think it's A tier. Singularity Rupture, a 6-mana Dimir sorcery, is another great mill card. I mentioned my Captain and Gathrod deck and the Golbears deck that I'm working on earlier, and this board wipe is a great fit for either of those decks. Any deck that wants to mill itself or wants to pilfer opponents' graveyards can make great use of this board wipe, and I think it's B tier. Biotech Specialist is a 2-mana Gruul creature. And while Gruul isn't the first color pairing I think of when it comes to sacrificing tons of artifacts, if you're running a deck that does, perhaps using cards like Togo, Roxanne, or Weaponized Production, then 2 damage ping per artifact definitely isn't significant, and I think this card is B tier. Next up is Tanuk Memorial Ensign, a 3-mana Gruul creature. He wants many lands to enter and pings when they do, and can generate you some card draw. As a commander, I think he'd pair well with any cards that let you power lands into play, like Exploration or Dryad of the Elysian Grove, though the payoff for that is pretty mild. Perhaps pinging the table for 3 to 4 damage per turn cycle, and getting you 1 to maybe 2 cards if you're lucky. There are some cool lines with him, like sacrificing all your lands and bringing them back with a card like Will of the Sultai, but personally I think that Hearthhull, which we'll talk about in a bit, is just a better card. As for a card in the 99, I think he's decent, but again, fits only the landfall strategy and requires other synergies to really do very much. And when he does, it's not going to be game breaking. I think he's B tier. Thalia Ascendant Cadet is a 5-mana Selesnya creature. She's by no means a cost-effective card, but I'm flagging her mainly for her card draw ability. In go-wide token decks, that's probably an ability worth paying for. It is just an Auron Frostfang with more steps, but still, if you want card draw, she is a decent source of it in those decks. As a commander, I probably wouldn't play her, but I think she is B tier. Sir Vondam's Sunstar Exemplar is a 2-mana Orzhov creature. As a commander, I don't think they've got that much going on or are particularly strong, particularly because I think they were probably created to be a standard card. That said, in the 99 of an Orzhov Knights deck, or perhaps a Sidar Jabari deck, I think he's decent enough as a growing threat and source of removal, and I think there, he's B tier. Pinnacle Emissary is a 3-mana Izzet artifact creature. If you're trying to create lots of artifacts, like I am in my Galazeth Prismari deck, then Pinnacle Emissary certainly helps you. It is pretty narrow though, as it only triggers on cast and not an artifact entering the battlefield, and I don't think that the warp has much value outside of the most niche combo situations, but in a deck like my Galazeth deck, it's good and I think it's B tier. Scouring Swarm is a 3-mana Golgari creature, and it's kind of like a reverse Scoot Swarm. In the right deck, that's sacrificing lots of lands like the World Shaper precon, this will have much the same effect and you'll definitely want it, and in that context I think it's B tier. Bragos Deaf Gastronaut is a 2-mana Boros creature, and is my sweet lobster prince. If you haven't already watched it, I recently made a video all about how I brewed him. As a commander, Bragos is vying for the best commander in the set because he's both high in power and high in flavor. Strap some lifelink to him and give him a vending machine and he'll deal 15 damage to the table and get you 45 life per turn cycle in the process. As a card in the 99, I think he works very well in selected decks like his culinary counterpart, Rocco Street Chef. I think Ragost is S tier. Another win for Boros is Sammy Wildcat Captain, a 6-mana creature. Sammy is both strong as a commander and as a card for the 99, because giving all your spells affinity is a truly wild ability. Exactly how it performs best as a commander I have yet to figure out, but I imagine the default will be playing tons of powerful equipment and making use of their double strike and vigilance. As a card in the 99, they also slot into a deck like Rocco Street Chef very well, where their role is abusing an abundance of easily created artifact tokens to power out expensive spells. I think Sammy is S tier. Hearthhull the World Seed is a 4-mana spacecraft, and as one of the 2 main precon commanders, I imagine you may already have seen them. As a commander, I think they're pretty cool. They give you a card draw engine and a way to close out the game. I haven't looked up much about how they're played, but I could see some pretty cool shenanigans, like tapping all your lands for mana, then sacrificing them to Azuran Orb, then getting them all back again with a card like Splendid Reclamation or Will of the Sultai, and then sacrificing them all again to bomb the table for about 40 damage. As a card in the 99, I'm less excited about them, but in any deck where you're sacrificing lands, it's pretty good, and I think Hearthal is A tier. The counterpart to Hearthal, we have Inspirit Flagship Vessel, a 3-mana Jeskai spacecraft. And as a commander, I think Inspirit is very cool, particularly how it creates a home to abuse all of the charge counters cards in Magic, with a cool spaceship at the helm. While not my favorite commander from the set, Inspirit ranks right up there. And as a card in the 99, I'm a little bit less excited about it, mostly because of the Jeskai color combination, which I think is pretty limiting, but I think regardless, Inspirit is A tier. The partner to Inspirit, Kilo Apogee Mind, is a 3-mana Jeskai artifact creature. Where Inspirit is all about progression in a linear way, Kilo is basically just the combo commander. Or at least I don't think it's powerful enough to do very much unless you're comboing. But that combo ability probably also makes it the stronger of the two commanders. If that's your vibe, it will likely combo with an old shoe and some spare gum, like an Aura of Dominion and a Pentad Prism. As a card in the 99, I think it's also quite good and could slot really well into energy decks that are also often Jeskai themed. I think Kilo is A tier. Infinite Guideline Station is a Wooburg spacecraft, and I should really love this card. It's 5 color and it's a space station, but yet I think it's pretty boring. When it enters, you make a bunch of 2/2s, and when you attack with it, you can draw a bunch of cards. Neither of those things are bad, but they're just not particularly interesting. I'm mentioning it because you may like it, but for me, it's pretty mid, both as a commander and a card in the 99. I think it's B tier. Dawnsire Sunstar Dreadnought is a 5-mana colorless spacecraft. And as a commander, I don't think Dawnsire is very good, despite it being very cool, but as a card in the 99, I do think it can do all sorts of fun things, like that combo that I mentioned earlier, because that 100 damage ability is just waiting to be broken. And it's a big spaceship, which is very cool. I think it's B tier. Moxite Refinery is a 2-mana artifact, and if you're cooking up a deck that wants to manipulate charge or 1/1 counters, like say a hot new spacecraft precon, then this is a fantastic addition, and it's B tier. Nutrient Block is a 1-mana artifact and is incredibly simple, but if you're playing a deck that likes to play and sacrifice cheap artifacts, this 1-mana option that replaces itself is a really solid inclusion, and it is B tier. Solar Array is a 3-cost mana rock, and while I don't normally like 3-cost mana rocks, Solar Array may be the one to buck that trend. Obviously the more colors you're running the better, but even in a Jeskai deck, 3 is a reasonable amount of 1/1 or charge counters for very little cost. And the upside here can be kind of wild. If I run this in my Aragorn deck and use it to help pay for his mana cost, he'd come into play as a 9/9 on turn 4. This is definitely one of the best 3-cost mana rocks I've seen to date with a lot of high upside, and I think it's A tier. Surge Conductor is a 3-mana artifact creature that allows you to proliferate whenever a non-token artifact comes into play. I'm not going to dig into all the potential ways to abuse this card, but there are many, especially since it's colorless so it can go in pretty much any deck. In general, it's a decent card, but in certain decks, it's going to be a broken combo piece, and this is A tier. You've probably already seen Tezzeret Cruel Captain, a 3-mana colorless planeswalker. I might be way off the mark here, and I might get some heat for this, but I think Tezzeret's actually going to be pretty mid in Commander, and is probably far better in a format like Standard. I say that because while in isolation his abilities certainly aren't bad, they don't offer anything game-breaking, and they don't offer much synergy with other things to create game-breaking situations either. Fetching a Soul Ring or perhaps a Shadow Spear, untapping something, or creating a creature every combat and giving it 3/1/1 counters isn't exactly going to win you a game of Commander, and therefore, I think he's B tier. The Endstone is a 7-mana legendary artifact, and I think it's a decent card. The strongest part is probably drawing a card every time a spell is played, because that has some very high potential upside. The secondary ability is good if you're aggressively using your health as a resource. In Limited or Standard, resetting your life to 20 is fantastic, but in Commander, you're deep in one-shot territory at 20 life. Most importantly, I have a big colorless deck, and I know this card's not broken because I have yet to decide whether or not it definitely gets a slot in the deck. I think this card is A tier. The Eternity Elevator is a 5-cost mana rock on steroids. When first cast, it's a little bit worse than Thran Dynamo, but if you station it, it obviously has a very high upside. You also have to have mana sync abilities to take full advantage of it, but it almost certainly finds a home in any big colorless deck, and I'm sure will find a home in many other decks as well. I think this is A tier. Next up is the Scourge of Edge of Eternities pre-releases everywhere, Thrumming Hivepool, a 6-mana artifact. If you're playing Slivers or perhaps Changelings, you're definitely playing Thrumming Pool. Given it's colorless and has affinity for slivers, you're doing something wrong if you spend mana to cast it, and giving all your slivers double strike and haste is absolutely wild. As if that wasn't enough, it also helps you grow your sliver army every turn. If you're a sliver player, get your copy now while they're plentiful and have a nice slivery day. This card, in context, is S tier. Last of the colorless cards, Virulent Silencer is a 3-mana artifact creature, and if only this one didn't have the non-token limiter. But if not, it would probably be too strong, turning your friendly neighborhood Thopter deck into a ruthless assassin. Regardless, there is likely a home out there in a low-to-the-ground artifact creature-based deck that can make great use of this poison ability, and I think in that context this is B tier. The last category we're looking at is lands, and the first up is Adagia Windswept Bastion. It allows you to spend 4 mana to copy an artifact or enchantment, and any ability that allows you to copy permanents can be pretty strong, especially if, like in this case, it's strapped to a land. The station ability, however, can be quite annoying to activate and makes the functionality of the land much lower. That said, in the right deck, I think this is still pretty good, and I would say it's B tier. Next up, we have the Tolarian Academy at home, Uthros Titanic Godcore. The upside of this land is obviously incredibly high, allowing us to make a lot of mana, and there's no reason that an artifact heavy deck would not want this land, as it's just game breaking if it does come online. That said, the station cost being 12 could at best be annoying and at worst be debilitating, because I think many of the decks that will want this land probably won't run lots of creatures. It's for that reason that I think this land is A tier. Eumidian Hatchery is a solid land for a deck like my Merrin deck, where I can use it to make mana in the early game, and at some point I can sacrifice it to make a whole bunch of tokens to fuel my experience counters. It also synergizes well in any deck that's trying to abuse Hermit Druid and wants untapped sources of black mana that aren't basic swamps. I think this land is B tier. Then we have Susa Secundi Void Altar. Lands that are sacrifice outlets are always incredibly strong, and they're also few and far between. And in this case, being able to draw tons of cards if we sacrifice a big creature as an upside for an ability we'd already want is even better. The station cost is again painful here, but I do think that the kind of deck that wants this ability is also far more likely to run many creatures, unlike a deck that wants Uthros. If the station ability was a bit lower in cost, I think this would be at least A tier, but for now, I think it's B tier. Much like we had Tolarian Academy at home, we have Gaia's Cradle at home, Evender Waking Haven. Strength-wise, I think it's probably tied with Uthros, but this is also going to be in a color and with an ability that makes the station cost much easier to pay. It's for that reason that I think we'll also end up seeing a lot more of Evendo than we do of Uthros at the tables that we play at. I think it's A tier. And last but not least, we have some fetchable dual lands in Festering Thicket, Vernal Fen, Glittering Massive, and Radiant Summit. These lands will make our mana bases smoother and more reliable, and I think they are all B tier. And those are all the cards that I think you should be aware of from Edge of Eternities. I've linked a high-res image of the tier list down below the like button so that you can double check for any cards that you may want to add to your decks. I've also linked everything else that I spoke about down there as well. Hopefully you found some cards that you're excited about, or possibly even a new deck that one of them has inspired you to build. And again, if you think I've missed anything that you think we should know about, head down to the comments. And as always, thank you for being here.